Hey guys, tonight we leave the safety of the harbor and step onto a wooden ship that's about to carry you across an ocean for months at a time. The ropes groan, gulls scream overhead, and the dock slowly slides away as if it's reconsidering your life choices for you. You stand there with a sea bag slung over your shoulder, pretending you're brave. You're not. You're thinking about warm bread, solid ground, and whether you remembered to say goodbye properly. Because once the coastline shrinks into a thin green line, you are committed. There's no turning back unless you plan on swimming. And statistically speaking, you probably won't survive this. Don't worry, that's just a little motivational humor. Mostly. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, comment your location and local time. I always love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The ship creaks beneath your boots as the last lines are cast off. In the early 1800s, thousands of sailors board vessels like this, merchant brigs, naval frigates, whaling ships, knowing full well they won't see land again for 3, 4, maybe 6 months. That's our first solid historical fact of the night. Long-haul voyages between Europe and Asia or around Cape Horn routinely stretch across entire seasons. There are no engines humming reassuringly below deck. Only canvas sails, muscle, and wind. You feel the deck shift as the wind catches. It's subtle at first. A gentle lean. Then the harbor water gives way to open swells, and your stomach realizes it has made a terrible mistake. Seasickness doesn't care how tough you think you are. Even seasoned sailors sometimes lean over the rail in quiet misery. Historians still argue whether sailors truly got their sea legs in a physiological sense or simply learned to endure the nausea through repetition and pride. Either way, you're learning fast. The shore fades. That's when it hits you, not the nausea, though that's definitely still there, but the scale of what you've agreed to. Months. Months of water in every direction. No quick messages home. No weather apps. No emergency rescue helicopters. If something goes wrong, it's you, the crew, and a floating forest of oak and pine. The ship itself feels alive. The rigging hums like a giant harp in the wind. Tar and salt fill the air. You quickly discover that privacy is a luxury of land. Down below deck, space is rationed tighter than food. You sling your hammock between two beams in a space barely wide enough to turn around. Dozens of other men do the same. When everyone's hammocks are hung, it looks like a cocoon factory. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Sailors sometimes believe that whistling on deck would whistle up a storm. So if you're the kind of person who absent-mindedly hums or whistles, you might want to stop. Nothing earns you dirty looks faster than tempting the weather gods. You're assigned your first watch before the coastline fully disappears. On a typical 19th century ship, the day is divided into watches, rotating shifts of 4 hours on, 4 hours off. That rhythm becomes your entire universe. You don't think in days anymore. You think in bells. Every half hour, a bell rings. It marks time in a world where clocks feel almost abstract. As evening settles, lantern light flickers against wooden beams. The sea is darker than you expect. It isn't just blue turned black. It's depth itself, an endless moving surface that reflects the stars like shattered glass. You lean against the rail, trying to imagine the route ahead. Perhaps you're sailing from Liverpool to Calcutta. Or from New Bedford chasing whales into the Pacific. These are real routes men sailed in the 1800s, relying on prevailing winds and stubborn optimism. You realize survival isn't just about food and water. It's psychological. The first week is the hardest. Your body rebels. Your mind drifts home. You replay conversations you barely noticed at the time. The smell of soil after rain. The way a door sounds when it closes in a house that doesn't move. And yet, something strange happens. The horizon begins to calm you. There's a rhythm to the waves, a predictable unpredictability. You start recognizing the language of the ship, the difference between normal creaking and the ominous crack that means trouble. The deck beneath you becomes familiar, almost comforting. Still, fear lingers. Pirates are not just storybook villains. In certain waters, they are very real threats. Storms can rise without warning. Disease can sweep through cramped quarters in days. There's a reason sailors were often viewed as half-mad adventurers. You have to be a little unhinged to trade stability for uncertainty on this scale. But you also feel something else. A quiet pride. Not everyone can do this. Not everyone will stand on a heaving deck in the middle of nowhere and think, alright, let's see what you've got. Night deepens. The wind stiffens. The land is gone now, truly gone. Only stars above and black water below. You grip the rail and feel the salt drying on your skin. Months stretch ahead like an unwritten book. Survival will depend on discipline, cooperation, and a surprising amount of salted meat. For now, though, you simply stand there, breathing in tar and brine, listening to the sigh of sails overhead. The journey has begun. There is no fast-forward button. Only wind, wood, and time. By the second sunrise, you stop thinking of the ship as transportation and start thinking of it as a floating neighborhood, one built entirely out of wood, rope, and optimism. You run your hand along the railing and feel the rough grain beneath tar and salt. This vessel isn't just planks nailed together. In the early 1800s, ships are feats of engineering, often constructed from massive oak timbers, with hulls thick enough to withstand cannon fire or the relentless pounding of Atlantic waves. A British naval frigate, for example, might carry hundreds of men and dozens of guns, while a merchant brig is slimmer, built more for cargo than combat. That's your mainstream fact for this stretch of the voyage. These ships are complex, layered ecosystems of design, each beam serving a purpose. You descend below deck and immediately understand the word cramped on a spiritual level. The ceiling presses low. You instinctively duck, even when you don't need to. Hammocks sway gently in tight rows, slung from hooks in the beams. During the day, they're rolled up and stowed to clear space. At night, they transform the dark hold into a forest of canvas cocoons. You quickly learn the golden rule of sleeping at sea: never lie parallel to the ship's length. If you do, every roll will slam you side to side like a human pendulum. Instead, you sleep slightly diagonal, letting the hammock swing with the motion rather than against it. It's less like resting and more like negotiating with gravity. Historians still argue whether hammock sleeping genuinely improved sailors' health compared to fixed bunks. Some claim the gentle rocking reduced pressure sores and kept bodies drier in damp air. Others suggest it was simply the most efficient way to stack dozens of humans in limited space. Either way, you're grateful not to be wedged on a rigid plank. Space is rationed with ruthless efficiency. Officers occupy small cabins toward the stern, where the ship's movement is slightly less violent. You, however, share air thick with sweat, tar, and the lingering ghost of salted beef. Personal belongings fit into a sea chest, if you're lucky enough to have one. Otherwise, your worldly possessions stay rolled in your bedding. Here's a quirky tidbit that might surprise you: some sailors sew coins into the seams of their clothes before departure. It's not just emergency money, it's burial insurance. There's a superstition that if you die at sea and wash ashore somewhere, those coins ensure a proper burial. Morbid? Slightly. Practical? Absolutely. The ship's design dictates survival. Above you, the rigging forms a web of lines, halyards, sheets, braces, each controlling sails that can span hundreds of square feet. Climbing into the rigging is not optional. You haul yourself up ratlins, rope ladders that sway over open water, sometimes in strong winds. From that height, the deck looks small. The ocean looks infinite. The hull below the waterline is just as critical. It's often coated with copper sheathing by the late 18th and early 19th centuries, a major innovation. Copper prevents shipworms and barnacles from devouring the wood and slowing the vessel. Without it, voyages stretch longer, supplies run thinner, and survival becomes more uncertain. You don't see the copper from where you stand, but you silently thank it anyway. Ventilation is another daily concern. Hatches are opened whenever weather allows, letting stale air escape. In storms, though, everything seals tight. The lower decks become damp caverns where condensation drips from beams. You begin to understand why respiratory illnesses spread easily in such environments. Your sleeping arrangement also doubles as your flotation device. In naval tradition, sailors are sometimes instructed to wrap themselves in their hammocks for burial at sea, with a cannonball at the feet to ensure sinking. There's a grim practicality to maritime life that you're slowly absorbing. Death is acknowledged, not dramatized. You start to appreciate the subtle design choices: the camber of the deck that allows water to run off, the scuppers, small openings along the sides, to drain seawater, the raised forecastle that protects against crashing waves. Every curve and joint exists because someone, somewhere, learned the hard way what happens without it. At night, you lie in your hammock and feel the ship breathe. Wood expands and contracts. The hull flexes slightly with each swell. It's not rigid like a building. It's alive, adjusting constantly. You begin to trust that flexibility. A stiff ship snaps. A flexible one survives. Privacy remains a fantasy. Snoring becomes background noise. Conversations drift in whispers. Sometimes someone talks in their sleep, calling out to a mother, a wife, a tavern back home. You pretend not to hear. Everyone does. The hierarchy of space is unmistakable. The captain's cabin might even have glass windows, small luxuries letting in light. You, meanwhile, navigate by lantern glow and memory. And yet, despite the tight quarters, there's a strange efficiency. Every man knows where to move, where to stow gear, how to avoid blocking narrow passageways during sudden maneuvers. You begin to feel the ship's rhythm in your bones. When it lists to port, you shift automatically. When it creaks in a certain way, you recognize the harmless complaint of timber rather than the crack of danger. Survival isn't just about enduring storms. It's about adapting to confinement without losing your sanity. Above deck, the wind freshens. Below deck, you settle into your swaying sling of canvas, learning to sleep in fragments rather than stretches. For hours at a time. Sometimes less. The ship may be small compared to the ocean, but it's vast compared to the alternative, open water with nothing to cling to. So you begin to see it not as a prison, but as protection. A wooden shell between you and oblivion. And as you drift off, rocked by swells that feel almost maternal now, you realize something unexpected: the cramped quarters aren't the enemy. Isolation would be. Here, at least, you're crowded together in the same improbable gamble against the sea. By the end of your first week, your stomach has stopped protesting the motion of the sea and started protesting something far more serious: the food. You knew it wouldn't be a luxury cruise, but nothing quite prepares you for the daily unveiling of shipboard cuisine in the 1800s. If you had romantic visions of hearty stews and fresh-baked loaves, let's gently set those adrift. The cornerstone of your diet is hardtack. Also known as ship's biscuit, it is flour, water, and sheer stubbornness baked into a brick. This is your mainstream historical fact for the evening. Hardtack could last for years if kept dry, which is exactly why navies and merchant ships relied on it. Longevity beats flavor every time when you're crossing oceans. You pick up a square and tap it against the table. It sounds like wood. That's never a comforting start to a meal. You learn quickly that you don't bite hardtack. You negotiate with it. You soak it in water, coffee, if you're lucky enough to have any, or broth. Sometimes you smash it with the butt of a knife just to make it vaguely cooperative. And even then, you inspect it carefully, because weevils often call it home. Tiny beetles that burrow into the biscuit during storage. The unspoken rule? Extra protein. You flick them out if you're feeling fancy. Most days, you just eat. Salted meat accompanies the hardtack, usually beef or pork preserved in brine so strong it feels like chewing on a salted memory of a cow. Barrels of it sit deep in the hold. When opened, the smell is powerful enough to rearrange your understanding of hunger. You soak the meat to leach out some of the salt, but it never quite returns to what you'd call tender. Historians still argue whether sailors' caloric intake was actually sufficient for the brutal physical labor required. Some records suggest daily rations provided thousands of calories, plenty on paper. But quality and nutrients are different beasts. Salted meat and hard biscuits keep you alive. They don't necessarily keep you thriving. There are peas too, dried into small, hard spheres that require long boiling. Sometimes oatmeal. Occasionally cheese, though it ages into something sharp and crumbly. Butter, if present, turns rancid quickly in warm climates. Fresh bread disappears within days of departure, a brief golden memory of land. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Sailors sometimes called a particularly infested biscuit a worm castle. Not exactly Michelin star branding. And yet, you notice something curious. Hunger reshapes your standards. After hauling ropes in cold wind for hours, even salted pork tastes like victory. Cooking happens in a small, iron stove called a galley, often located on the upper deck to reduce fire risk. Fire aboard a wooden ship is the ultimate nightmare. So every flame is watched carefully. In rough weather, pots slide, flames gutter, and cooking becomes an acrobatic act. You've never appreciated a stable kitchen floor more. Water for cooking is rationed, so meals are simple. One-pot affairs. Thick, heavy stews when ingredients allow. On better supplied ships, perhaps a rare treat of preserved cabbage. On whaling voyages, fresh whale meat sometimes supplements rations, though opinions on its flavor vary dramatically. The monotony is what wears on you. Day after day, the same textures, the same salt-heavy bite. Food becomes less about enjoyment and more about fuel. You begin to understand how morale is tied to meals. A slightly better ration can lift spirits. A spoiled barrel can sour the entire deck. And spoilage is constant enemy number one. Barrels leak. Rats find their way into stores despite traps and cats. Mold creeps in unnoticed. The ship's purser, responsible for provisions, keeps careful records, because mismanagement can mean starvation months later. You start to develop rituals around eating. Tapping hardtack twice before breaking it open. Trading a portion of pork for someone's extra peas. Small negotiations that create microeconomies within the crew. Food becomes currency as much as sustenance. In tropical climates, heat accelerates decay. In colder regions, rations last longer but cooking becomes a battle against numb fingers and icy decks. The environment shapes the menu as much as supply lists do. There's also fishing. When weather and time permit, lines are cast overboard. Fresh fish sizzling in a pan feels like a miracle. Even a modest catch transforms the mood instantly. For a moment, you taste something that didn't spend months in a barrel. Yet scurvy lurks quietly in the background, though you don't fully understand it yet. Vitamin C deficiency will become a looming threat later in the voyage. For now, you simply notice that fresh fruits and vegetables are already distant memories. You chew slowly tonight, perched on a low bench, lantern light flickering across tired faces. No one complains loudly. Complaints waste energy. Instead, there's a shared acceptance. This is the trade. You exchange culinary comfort for distance traveled. And strangely, as the days pass, your body adapts. You crave salt less. You stop flinching at the crunch of a stray weevil. Survival reshapes disgust into pragmatism. You glance at the dark sea beyond the rail and realize something profound in its simplicity. As long as the barrels hold and the biscuits remain mostly intact, you live. Food may be bland, repetitive, even occasionally crawling, but it is the thin, steady thread keeping you tethered to tomorrow. You swallow the last bite, wash it down with a measured sip of water, and wipe your hands on rough cloth. It isn't glamorous. It isn't delicious. But it works. If food is the steady drumbeat of survival, water is the ticking clock. You don't think much about it on land. You turn a tap. You fill a cup. Out here, every swallow is calculated. Before departure, barrels of fresh water are rolled carefully into the hold, heavy, sloshing lifelines stacked in dark rows. This is your mainstream historical anchor for the moment. On long 19th century voyages, each sailor's daily water ration could be as little as 1 gallon or less, sometimes significantly reduced as weeks stretched into months. That amount has to cover drinking, minimal cooking, and occasionally the faint hope of washing. The barrels themselves are both solution and problem. Water stored in wood doesn't stay fresh forever. It stagnates. It absorbs flavor from the cask. Tiny organisms bloom invisibly in the dark. After weeks at sea, the water can taste sour, almost alive in the wrong way. You take a sip and try not to think about it. Historians still argue whether water spoilage caused more illness than we fully understand today, or whether sailors simply accepted mild contamination as normal. Either way, you learn quickly, you drink what you're given. No more. No less. This is where rum enters the story. The British Royal Navy famously issued daily rum rations, often diluted with water to create grog. The practice became formalized in the 18th century and continued well into the 19th. Mixing rum with water helped mask unpleasant flavors and, some believed, made the water safer. Whether it truly killed pathogens in meaningful amounts is debated, but morale? That it definitely improved. You line up with the others as the purser measures out portions. The ritual is precise. No one wants accusations of favoritism or theft. A little too generous and the supply runs thin. A little too stingy and resentment brews faster than a storm cloud. There's something grounding about that shared ration. A small cup passed into your hand. A brief burn in your throat. It reminds you that time is moving, that days are being marked. In some ships, the bosun's call rings out before distribution, a shrill note slicing through wind and conversation. But rum is not unlimited. Merchant vessels may offer less than naval ships. Whalers sometimes substitute other spirits if rum runs low. And on particularly strict voyages, alcohol is tightly controlled to prevent disorder. Discipline at sea depends on clarity as much as courage. Here's a quirky tidbit drifting your way. In some superstitions, spilling your ration accidentally is considered a terrible omen, almost an insult to the sea. So when the ship lurches unexpectedly and your cup sloshes, you tighten your grip instinctively, as though fate itself is watching. Water discipline shapes your day. You learn not to gulp. You take slow, deliberate sips. Your tongue grows accustomed to dryness. Bathing becomes a rare luxury. Saltwater washes are common, quick scrubs on deck using buckets hauled from overboard. Salt cleans, but it doesn't soothe. Your skin tightens, hair stiffens, everything carrying a faint crust of brine. Rain becomes celebration. When dark clouds gather and fat drops begin to fall, tarps are stretched, sails adjusted to channel runoff into clean containers. You tilt your face upward, mouth open, laughing like a child. Fresh rainwater tastes impossibly pure. For a few minutes, ration anxiety dissolves. Yet even rain must be managed carefully. Too much collected too quickly risks contamination from dirty canvas. Too little means disappointment. As weeks pass, you begin to understand how dehydration sneaks in. Fatigue feels heavier. Headaches linger. In tropical heat, sweat drains you faster than you realize. The ship's surgeon, or whoever serves in that role, keeps an eye on signs of weakness. But prevention is difficult when supply is finite. There's also hierarchy in thirst. Officers sometimes receive slightly better portions. Not extravagantly so, but enough to remind you of rank. It's a subtle tension, rarely voiced openly. You start to dream about water. Cold streams. Deep wells. The sound of a bucket splashing down into darkness and rising full. On watch at night, staring over black waves, you're surrounded by water and yet unable to drink it. The ocean is abundance turned hostile. Salt saturates everything, lips, skin, rope fibers, while thirst hums quietly beneath the surface. In desperate circumstances, ships have attempted crude desalination by boiling seawater and capturing steam, but this requires fuel and equipment rarely practical for routine use in the early 1800s. So you rely on barrels and hope. Ration reduction is the moment everyone dreads. When the captain announces tighter measures due to slow winds or navigational delays, a ripple passes through the crew. No one panics outwardly. But calculations begin silently in every mind. How many weeks remain? How many casks unopened? You notice how sharing changes under scarcity. Small kindnesses stand out, a man offering you half his portion after you help him secure a line in a squall. These gestures bind you together more tightly than any rope. And then there's the discipline of restraint. You learn to resist temptation. A second cup today could mean none tomorrow. Survival becomes a long game, measured in careful sips. As twilight falls, you cradle your ration and watch the horizon glow briefly gold before fading to indigo. The ship rolls gently. The air cools. You swallow slowly, letting the water, or grog, linger before it disappears. Out here, thirst is a teacher. It strips life to essentials. It reminds you that oceans are not friendly expanses but vast tests of planning and patience. You wipe your mouth with the back of your hand, pass the empty cup back into the system, and return to your post. The barrels below deck creak softly as the ship moves, guardians of tomorrow's survival. You don't notice it at first. A little fatigue. Gums that feel tender when you chew your beloved brick of hardtack. Maybe a bruise that seems darker than it should. Out here, discomfort is normal. You've been living on salted meat, dried peas, and stubborn optimism for weeks now. Of course your body feels off. But then someone else starts complaining too. Scurvy is the quiet passenger aboard nearly every long 18th and early 19th century voyage. That's your solid historical fact for this stretch of water. Before the widespread, consistent enforcement of citrus rations, scurvy killed more sailors than storms or shipwrecks. It's not dramatic at first. It's slow, subtle, almost polite. Your gums swell. They bleed when you bite down. Old scars ache as if the past is knocking from inside your skin. Fatigue sinks deeper, not just tiredness but a kind of bone-heavy exhaustion that no hammock can fix. Vitamin C deficiency, though you don't have that scientific vocabulary yet, means your body can't repair itself properly. Collagen production falters. Tissues weaken. Historians still argue whether naval authorities truly understood why citrus worked or simply observed that it did. By the late 1700s, the British Navy had begun issuing lemon juice with notable success, earning sailors the nickname limeys later on. But enforcement varied. Merchant ships often cut corners to save money. And if citrus stores spoiled, or were never stocked, you were left to fate and folklore. On your ship, rumors swirl before official announcements ever do. Someone whispers that the captain has locked away a barrel of limes for officers only. Someone else insists that sauerkraut can prevent the disease. Another swears that vinegar is the cure. Sailors cling to patterns. If one man recovers after eating something different, that thing becomes mythically powerful overnight. Here's a quirky tidbit that drifts through your mind as you sit on deck. Some sailors believed scurvy came from laziness or bad air rather than diet. So victims were sometimes forced to exercise more, as if marching in place could summon nutrients from thin air. It's tragic in hindsight. You can almost hear the collective groan of modern nutritionists. The ship surgeon, if you have one, does what he can. He inspects swollen gums with furrowed brow. He prescribes what limited remedies exist. Maybe there's a stash of preserved citrus juice, thick and slightly fermented but still potent. Maybe there isn't. You watch a crewmate struggle to climb the rigging. His legs tremble. His grip falters. Tasks that were once routine now look monumental. Scurvy doesn't just sap strength, it erodes morale. When one man weakens, the workload shifts to others. Resentment flickers, quickly smothered by shared fear. Because you all know the pattern. Untreated, scurvy can lead to open sores, tooth loss, internal bleeding. It's a grim progression. And yet, it's entirely preventable. That's the maddening part. Fresh fruits, vegetables, things abundant on land, are nearly absent here. Months at sea strip life down to preservation and rationing. Nutrition becomes collateral damage. You check your own gums with your tongue, a quiet inventory. Still firm. Still intact. Relief washes through you like calm seas after a storm. Disease aboard ship isn't limited to scurvy. Dysentery spreads through contaminated food or water. Fevers bloom in cramped quarters. Respiratory infections linger in damp air. The ship is a closed ecosystem. Once illness enters, it moves efficiently. Ventilation helps when weather allows. Bedding is aired on deck under the sun to kill lice and mildew. Cleanliness is enforced, not out of luxury, but necessity. Buckets of seawater scrub decks daily. The smell of vinegar sometimes cuts through the usual salt tar haze, used as a crude disinfectant. You begin to understand survival as a layered defense. Good design, disciplined rationing, hygiene, luck. Remove one layer, and vulnerability creeps in. When at last the captain announces that small portions of citrus will be distributed, perhaps after a supply stop or from carefully guarded reserves, a collective shift moves through the crew. The fruit is shriveled, not glamorous. But when you bite into it, the sharp tang floods your mouth like sunlight. It's almost overwhelming after weeks of salt and starch. You savor every drop. Not just for taste, but for what it represents: protection. Prevention. A thin shield against a silent enemy. Historians still debate how many lives were lost unnecessarily due to slow adoption of dietary reforms. Was it ignorance? Bureaucracy? Cost? Likely all three. But standing here, feeling the sour juice sting your cracked lips, you're less interested in policy and more interested in staying upright. The ocean doesn't care whether you're sick. Waves don't pause for swollen gums. Sails must still be trimmed. Pumps must still be worked. So even the ill try to contribute, driven by pride as much as duty. At night, you lie in your hammock listening to coughs echo softly in the dark. Each one a reminder of fragility. And yet, there's resilience too. Men recover. Strength returns gradually. The body, given even a small chance, fights back. You drift toward sleep with a strange mix of gratitude and caution. Survival at sea isn't heroic in the way paintings suggest. It's incremental. Measured in bites of citrus, in clean decks, in shared knowledge slowly replacing superstition. Your gums ache a little less tonight. And in this floating world of wood and wind, that counts as a quiet victory. The storm doesn't send you a polite invitation. It arrives as a mood shift. The wind sharpens. The horizon bruises purple. The ship's easy rhythm tightens into something alert, almost suspicious. You feel it in the deck beneath your boots, the subtle change in vibration as sails strain harder against gathering force. In the 1800s, storms are not just inconvenient weather events, they are existential tests. That's your solid historical anchor here. Before modern meteorology, sailors relied on barometers, cloud patterns, and experience to anticipate foul weather, but forecasts were little more than educated guesses. If a storm caught you mid-ocean, you rode it out or you didn't. Orders snap across the deck. Reef the sails. You scramble upward into rigging that now feels less like a ladder and more like a living thing thrashing in the wind. Canvas must be reduced, reefed, to prevent it from tearing or overpowering the masts. Your fingers move fast, cold rope biting into skin. Rain needles your face. The sea below shifts from rolling swells to jagged peaks. Historians still argue whether 19th-century seamanship was more art than science. Some captains developed near-mythic reputations for reading the sea, adjusting course at just the right moment. Others trusted instinct too long and paid dearly. Out here, leadership is survival. The first real wave slams the hull with a deep, booming thud. You feel it in your chest. Water surges across the deck, ankle-deep, then knee-deep, before draining through scuppers along the sides. The cambered deck, curved slightly to shed water, proves its worth. Design matters when gravity becomes unpredictable. Below deck, chaos hums. Loose items must be secured. Barrels lashed tighter. Hammocks tied up. Anything free becomes a projectile. Fire in the galley is extinguished. No one is cooking tonight. Here's a quirky tidbit that flickers through your mind between gusts. Some sailors believed that throwing a coin into the sea could appease storm spirits. A small bribe to the elements. You don't see anyone doing it now, but you understand the impulse. When nature roars this loudly, superstition feels almost rational. The ship heels sharply to starboard, tilting at an angle that makes walking impossible without gripping rope. You cling to a line, boots skidding. Lightning forks across the sky, illuminating walls of water rising like liquid mountains. Thunder rolls so close it feels physical. And then comes the pumps. No wooden ship is perfectly watertight. Seams swell and contract. Planks flex. In heavy seas, water finds its way in. So you join the line at the manual bilge pumps, long handles worked rhythmically to expel accumulating seawater from the hold. This is relentless labor. Hours of pushing and pulling in dim light, sweat mixing with spray. If the pumps fail, the ship grows heavier. Sluggish. Vulnerable. So you keep moving, muscles burning. The storm doesn't pause. Neither do you. There's fear, of course. Anyone who claims otherwise is either lying or inexperienced. You think of the stories: ships dismasted, hulls cracked, men swept overboard. Safety lines are clipped. Orders are shouted twice. The crew moves as one organism, each action dependent on the other. And then there's the waiting. Storms can last hours. Sometimes days. You lose track of time measured in bells. The sky remains a violent blur. Sleep becomes impossible. Even below deck, the noise is overwhelming, wood groaning, cargo shifting, wind shrieking through rigging like a choir of angry ghosts. Yet here's the quiet truth, most ships survive most storms. Seamanship, preparation, and sheer stubborn construction carry you through. Oak timbers bend but do not snap. Masts flex like giant reeds. Historians still debate how many storm losses were truly unavoidable versus the result of poor judgment. Did captains push too hard to maintain schedules? Did they fail to heave to, turning the ship to ride out waves more safely? These arguments echo long after wreckage sinks. At some point, though you can't pinpoint when, the fury softens. The wind drops from scream to howl to heavy breath. Rain slackens. The sea remains rough, but the sharpness fades. Exhaustion crashes over you harder than any wave. You step onto the deck at dawn and witness aftermath. Lines tangled. A sail torn like fabric ripped by a giant hand. One lifeboat cracked. But the masts stand. The hull floats. You are here. Damage control begins immediately. Sailmakers stitch canvas. Carpenters inspect beams for stress fractures. Every man has a task. Survival isn't just about enduring the storm, it's about repairing quickly enough to face the next one. You realize something profound in the wreckage: storms bond crews in ways calm seas never could. Shared danger forges quiet respect. The man beside you at the pump is no longer just a bunkmate, he's the reason you're still afloat. Salt crusts your eyelashes. Your hands are blistered raw. But you're alive. The horizon, once a battlefield, returns to a steady line. The ocean has tested you and, for now, found you adequate. You lean against the rail, breathing in air scrubbed clean by rain, and feel the ship settle back into rhythm. Wood creaks softly, almost contentedly, as if proud of its resilience. Out here, survival isn't dramatic heroism. It's reefing sails at the right moment. It's pumping water until your arms tremble. It's trusting oak, rope, and the men beside you. The sea will rise again. It always does. But tonight, you float. Once the storm becomes memory instead of immediate threat, routine slides back into place like a well-worn groove. Survival at sea isn't built on heroics alone, it's built on rhythm. You live now by the watch system, a structure so steady it almost feels like a heartbeat. In the 1800s, most ocean-going ships divide the day into watches, typically 4 hours on duty, 4 hours off. That's your mainstream historical anchor for this stretch. The system rotates so no one is permanently stuck with the worst hours, though the dreaded middle watch, from midnight to 4 a.m. still feels like a personal insult from time itself. Bells mark each half hour. 1 bell. 2 bells. Up to 8. Then the cycle resets. You stop thinking in sunrise and sunset. You think in bells. You might be hauled from your hammock at what feels like the dead center of night. The deck is cold beneath your boots. Stars scatter overhead in impossible numbers. Your breath fogs in the dark. Sleep clings stubbornly to your thoughts, but the sea doesn't care about your circadian preferences. Work depends on the ship and its purpose. On a merchant vessel, you check cargo lashings, trim sails, scrub decks, maintain rigging. On a naval ship, there are drills, gunnery practice, formation maneuvers. On a whaler, lookout duty for the faint spout of a whale becomes an obsession. Every role feeds the same objective: keep moving, keep floating, keep control. Historians still argue whether the watch system was truly fair or simply efficient. Some records suggest favoritism in assignments. Others show careful rotation to preserve morale. Either way, exhaustion becomes a shared language. You learn to fall asleep quickly and wake instantly. The body adapts in strange ways. You nap deeply in short bursts. You eat at odd hours. Sometimes you wake unsure whether it's morning or evening until you step outside and let the sky orient you. Your internal clock becomes flexible, almost fluid. Here's a quirky tidbit drifting through your half-awake brain. Sailors sometimes use the phrase dog watch to describe the 2 shorter evening watches, split to rotate schedules more fairly. Why dog? Theories range from corruption of Dodge watch to obscure naval slang. No one agrees completely. Sailors shrug and accept the name, because arguing semantics at sea rarely improves your sleep. Routine tasks may sound mundane, but they are lifelines. Scrubbing decks with holystones, blocks of sandstone used to scour wood, keeps planks clean and less slippery. Maintenance prevents rot from spreading unnoticed. Even coiling ropes properly matters, a tangled line in an emergency wastes precious seconds. You climb into the rigging under bright noon sun one watch, then stand lookout at twilight the next. The repetition shapes your muscles. You grow stronger without noticing. Your balance improves. You lean instinctively with the ship's roll. Discipline is woven into the rhythm. If you miss a bell or shirk duty, consequences follow swiftly. Not always dramatic, sometimes just extra chores, but enough to reinforce order. Out here, reliability equals survival. And yet, monotony seeps in like a slow tide. The horizon rarely changes. Water. Sky. Water again. Days blur. You mark time by small events, a pod of dolphins racing the bow, a distant sail on the edge of sight, a slightly better meal. Even storms, disruptive as they are, break monotony. You begin to understand why some sailors talk to the sea as if it's a companion. Long stretches of blue can feel hypnotic. You stand at the rail during your watch, scanning for hazards, and your mind drifts. Thoughts stretch longer. Simpler. The rhythm of waves below becomes almost meditative. Fatigue, however, is always nearby. 4 hours on watch can stretch endlessly in harsh weather. Rain stings your face. Wind numbs your fingers. Then, just as your body wants to rest, the bell rings and you're relieved. You descend below deck, collapse into your hammock, and surrender instantly. Sleep aboard ship isn't gentle. It's functional. The creak of timbers, the slap of waves, the murmur of other men breathing, it all blends into a constant lullaby. Sometimes you dream of land so vividly you wake reaching for something that isn't there. Historians debate whether sailors of this era experienced chronic sleep deprivation more severely than we estimate today. Diaries mention exhaustion frequently, yet also resilience. Perhaps the human body, when pressed into rhythm, finds ways to endure. You notice something else: camaraderie grows strongest during shared watches. Conversations in low voices beneath starlight. Jokes murmured to keep spirits light. Stories traded quietly to fill the hours. Bonds deepen in these in-between moments, when nothing dramatic happens and yet everything matters. Because survival isn't one grand gesture. It's hundreds of small, repeated acts. Hoist. Tie. Scrub. Watch. Rest. Repeat. You lean against the rail during the middle watch, the sea dark and endless. The ship moves steadily forward, sails taut in the night breeze. Bells ring softly behind you, marking time like distant church chimes in a town you can't quite remember. Your life is now divided into manageable pieces. 4 hours. Then another 4. Then another. Months compress into cycles of duty and rest. And strangely, within that structure, you find stability. The ocean may be vast and unpredictable, but your watch begins and ends on cue. The bell rings whether you feel ready or not. You listen for it now, knowing it will come. And when it does, you move. Somewhere between watches and weeks, you realize that the ship is moving through emptiness with surprising confidence. There are no road signs out here. No painted lines across the Atlantic kindly guiding you toward your destination. And yet, somehow, you are not lost. Navigation in the 1800s is part mathematics, part astronomy, and part stubborn belief in your own calculations. That's your solid historical fact for this stretch of sea. By the early 19th century, skilled navigators used sextants to measure the angle between the horizon and celestial bodies, usually the sun at noon or stars at night, to determine latitude. Longitude, once a deadly mystery, is increasingly solved with the help of marine chronometers, precise clocks that keep homeport time even as you travel across time zones. You watch the ship's navigator step onto the quarterdeck near midday. The sun is bright, high overhead. He lifts a brass sextant to his eye, aligning mirrors with steady hands despite the ship's motion. It looks delicate, almost ornamental, but it represents centuries of maritime trial and error. A wrong reading could mean missing landfall by hundreds of miles. Historians still argue whether early chronometers were trusted immediately or viewed with suspicion. Mechanical clocks at sea? It sounded risky. Salt air corrodes, humidity warps wood, motion jostles gears. Yet the invention of reliable chronometers in the late 18th century revolutionizes navigation. Knowing precise time at a fixed reference point, like Greenwich, allows calculation of longitude by comparing it with local noon. You don't perform the math yourself, but you feel its consequences. When land eventually appears exactly where predicted, morale surges. When days pass without sighting and doubt creeps in, you sense tension rising quietly among officers. Dead reckoning also plays a role. Speed is estimated using a log line, a rope with knots tied at intervals, thrown overboard and measured against a sandglass timer. Count the knots that pass through your fingers in a set time, and you estimate speed in knots. It's simple, almost primitive, but it works, most of the time. Here's a quirky tidbit drifting across your mind as you stare at the stars during the night watch. Some sailors swear that certain constellations feel lucky, while others bring misfortune. The Southern Cross in southern hemispheres becomes a reassuring signpost. Polaris in the north stands steady, a fixed anchor in a spinning sky. You begin to recognize them instinctively, like old friends. On clear nights, the navigator spreads charts in his cabin. Paper maps inked with coastlines, hazards, trade winds, and faint notations from previous voyages. Some areas are precise. Others are suspiciously vague. Blank spaces linger where exploration is incomplete. The ocean may be vast, but human knowledge is still patchy. You realize something quietly humbling: you are trusting your life to angles of light and ticking gears. Cloud cover complicates everything. Days of overcast skies mean no celestial readings. Then dead reckoning grows more uncertain. Currents may push you subtly off course. Wind shifts alter speed. Small errors accumulate. Historians still debate how accurate average merchant navigators truly were compared to naval officers with formal training. Records show remarkable precision at times, and shocking miscalculations at others. When fog rolls in, visibility shrinks to nothing. The world reduces to gray mist and the slap of waves against hull. You rely on compass headings and disciplined steering. The magnetic compass, simple yet powerful, aligns faithfully with Earth's field, though local magnetic variation must be accounted for. Even that invisible shift can alter destiny if ignored. You stand beside the helmsman one evening, watching him hold steady against the wheel. It requires constant correction. The sea nudges. The wind pushes. He adjusts. Over and over. Survival is not about setting a course once, it's about continuous small corrections. And then there are currents, the Gulf Stream in the Atlantic, powerful and warm, capable of speeding or hindering progress. Experienced captains factor them in. Inexperienced ones learn painfully. The stars become more than decoration. During your night watch, you tilt your head back and see a map written in light. You begin recognizing patterns. Orion rising in winter. The Milky Way spilling overhead like luminous smoke. There's comfort in celestial consistency. No matter how the sea shifts, the stars follow predictable paths. Navigation is also psychological. Confidence from the quarterdeck trickles down. If officers appear certain, the crew relaxes. If whispers of miscalculation circulate, unease spreads like dampness below deck. You overhear quiet debates near the chart table. Slight discrepancies between yesterday's estimate and today's observation. Minor adjustments made with furrowed brows. Historians still argue whether captains sometimes concealed navigational errors to preserve authority. Pride can be as dangerous as a storm. Days later, when a faint smudge appears on the horizon exactly where predicted, a distant island or the pale line of coastline, you feel a surge of admiration. Against all odds, using brass instruments and sun angles, you have crossed hundreds of miles of featureless water and arrived precisely where intended. It feels almost magical. But it's math. Patience. Repetition. You return to your post as dusk settles, aware that your survival depends not only on strong hulls and disciplined watches, but on invisible geometry traced between sun, sea, and ticking time. The ship glides forward under starlight. Somewhere ahead lies land you haven't seen in months. Somewhere behind, the path you carved through water closes without a trace. And still, guided by light-years-old stars and a clock carefully wound each day, you continue. Order at sea isn't optional. It's structural. You feel it the moment a command cuts through deck chatter, sharp, precise, unquestioned. A ship in the 1800s operates under a rigid hierarchy. Captain at the top, then lieutenants or mates, petty officers, and finally you and the rest of the crew. That's your mainstream historical anchor here. Maritime law granted captains immense authority, especially on long voyages where they functioned as judge, employer, and ultimate decision-maker. Once you leave harbor, their word becomes reality. You might admire your captain. You might quietly resent him. It doesn't change the chain of command. Discipline keeps sails trimmed on time, pumps work during storms, and watches properly rotated. Without it, small inefficiencies compound into catastrophe. Historians still argue whether 19th-century naval discipline was excessively harsh or simply necessary for survival under extreme conditions. The debate lingers in journals and court-martial records alike. Punishments vary depending on the ship and era. Extra duty is common, scrubbing decks, cleaning heads, hauling lines beyond your usual watch. Public reprimands sting more than you expect. Pride is currency out here. On naval vessels, harsher penalties exist. Flogging, though gradually declining in use through the 19th century, remains a real threat in some fleets. The mere presence of a cat-o'-nine-tails stored somewhere below deck is often enough to maintain compliance. Merchant ships may rely more on docking wages or confinement. You stand in formation one morning as a crewman is accused of theft, stealing from shared rations. The tension is palpable. Food is survival, stealing it isn't petty crime, it's communal betrayal. Evidence is presented. Witnesses speak. The captain's face remains unreadable. Here's a quirky tidbit that circulates quietly among sailors: some believe that witnessing punishment without removing your hat invites bad luck at sea. Superstition threads itself even into discipline. So hats come off, whether from respect or fear of tempting fate. The verdict is swift. Extra labor and ration reduction. No dramatic spectacle. Just a firm reminder that survival depends on collective trust. Mutiny hovers as a distant, dangerous word. It's rare but not unheard of. You've likely heard tales, like the infamous mutiny aboard HMS Bounty decades earlier, where crew rebelled against command. Historians still argue whether such uprisings stemmed from cruelty, desperation, or complex social tensions. But aboard your ship, the possibility lingers like a shadow. Not because rebellion is glamorous, but because prolonged hardship can fray even disciplined crews. You feel that fragility in subtle ways. Grumbling during extended ration cuts. Tighten jaws after unfair watch assignments. Leadership requires more than authority, it demands balance. A captain who pushes too hard risks resentment. One who's too lenient risks chaos. Hierarchy shapes daily interactions. You don't address officers casually. You wait to speak unless invited. Promotions, when they happen, alter relationships overnight. A former bunkmate elevated to petty officer must now enforce rules on friends. It's awkward. Necessary. Sometimes resented. And yet, structure offers comfort. In a world of unpredictable weather and endless horizons, knowing exactly who gives orders and who follows them simplifies decisions. During storms, no one debates strategy mid-gale. Commands are executed instantly. That clarity saves lives. There are rituals reinforcing order. Inspections where hammocks must be tightly lashed and gear properly stowed. Muster calls counting every soul aboard. Records meticulously kept, wages, rations, infractions. Paperwork may seem mundane, but it anchors authority in documentation. Historians debate whether sailors were more rebellious than other laborers of the era. Some argue that the very nature of maritime work, dangerous, confined, dependent on cooperation, encouraged solidarity that could tip into defiance. Others contend that isolation made obedience more practical than resistance. Out here, there's nowhere to run. You sense how discipline intertwines with morale. A fair captain earns loyalty. A cruel one breeds quiet calculation. The line between firm leadership and tyranny can be thin as a rope in strong wind. At night, in hushed conversation, stories circulate. Ships where captains starved crews to extend profits. Others where leaders shared hardships equally, boosting morale immeasurably. These narratives shape expectations more than official rules ever could. You examine your own reactions. When an order feels unreasonable, you weigh response carefully. Pride urges protest. Survival urges compliance. Most days, survival wins. Still, there are small acts of autonomy. A joke slipped quietly during watch. A subtle slowing of pace when exhaustion peaks. Nothing overt. Just human adjustments within rigid structure. Discipline doesn't extinguish personality, it channels it. The loud become quieter. The timid grow sharper. Everyone learns boundaries quickly. You watch the captain one evening as he studies the horizon. His posture carries weight, not just authority, but responsibility. Every decision, course changes, ration adjustments, storm strategies, rests ultimately on his judgment. That burden is heavy. And you realize something quietly humbling: while discipline can feel oppressive, it also distributes risk. You are not alone making life and death choices. You execute. He decides. The bell rings, marking the end of your watch. Structure again. Predictable. Reassuring. You step below deck, passing through beams scarred by time and salt, aware that hierarchy, however imperfect, is one of the invisible beams holding this floating world together. Without it, wood and rope would not be enough. Long after you've memorized the watch bells and accepted the taste of brine in everything, a quieter challenge settles in: loneliness. It's strange, really. You are never physically alone. Dozens, sometimes hundreds of men surround you at all hours. Hammocks sway shoulder to shoulder. Boots thud overhead. Voices murmur in the dark. And yet, somewhere between horizon and horizon, you begin to feel the absence of the world you left behind. In the 1800s, voyages lasting 3 to 6 months were common on major trade routes, and longer still for whalers roaming the Pacific. That's your steady historical anchor here. Communication with home simply stopped the moment sails were raised. No letters sent mid-ocean. No updates. Your family might not know if you're alive until you physically return. Historians still argue whether prolonged isolation at sea produced measurable psychological strain comparable to modern long-duration expeditions. Diaries from sailors mention homesickness frequently, sometimes gently, sometimes with raw ache. The sea tests not only muscle but memory. You find yourself replaying small, ordinary scenes from home. The creak of a familiar door. The smell of bread baking. The way light falls through a window at a certain hour. These details become sharper the longer you're away, like your mind polishing them out of necessity. Faith often fills the quiet spaces. On many ships, especially naval ones, Sunday services are held when weather permits. The crew gathers on deck, hats removed, listening to prayers carried away by wind. Scripture offers structure to weeks that might otherwise blur. You may not consider yourself devout on land, but here, beneath endless sky, even casual belief deepens. Here's a quirky tidbit drifting through the hush of evening. Some sailors refuse to sail on Fridays, believing it brings bad luck. Others consider women aboard ships, outside of specific roles, to be omens of disaster. These superstitions vary wildly, but almost every sailor carries at least one small ritual. A coin kept in a pocket. A charm tied discreetly into rigging. You notice them more as weeks pass. You develop your own rituals without realizing it. Touching a particular beam before climbing to the tops. Looking for the same star at the beginning of each night watch. Small anchors for the mind. The ocean amplifies thought. During long stretches of calm weather, when sails barely fill and the ship creeps forward, silence grows thick. The creak of timber becomes almost conversational. You lean against the rail and stare at water that reflects nothing but sky. Historians still debate whether superstition at sea was born from ignorance or psychological necessity. When faced with forces beyond control, storms, illness, shifting winds, belief systems offer comfort. If you can attribute misfortune to a broken rule or neglected ritual, it feels less random. You overhear whispered stories below deck. Tales of ghost ships sighted at dusk. Of phantom lights dancing on the water, St. Elmo's fire flickering along mast tips during electrical storms. A real phenomenon, by the way, caused by ionized air during thunderstorms. Some see it as blessing. Others as warning. You watch it once yourself, blue glow trembling along rigging, and feel your spine prickle. Loneliness also surfaces in conflict. Minor irritations grow sharper when there's no escape. The same laugh, repeated daily, begins to grate. The same snore becomes unbearable. Space is limited. Patience must stretch. Yet something else grows alongside loneliness: camaraderie. Shared hardship fosters bonds that feel almost familial. You learn who tells the best stories. Who can splice rope flawlessly. Who quietly hums lullabies when he thinks no one hears. Conversations deepen at night, when stars burn bright and vulnerability feels less exposed. You speak about home cautiously at first. Then more openly. A mother's garden. A brother's stubbornness. A promised sweetheart. These memories, spoken aloud, become communal property for a moment, held gently by others who understand. You realize survival isn't just about food, water, or discipline. It's about maintaining a sense of self when the horizon never changes. Sometimes you climb to the forecastle alone at dawn, just before your watch ends. The sky softens from indigo to pale gold. For a few minutes, you feel suspended between worlds. Not entirely of the sea. Not entirely of land anymore either. Historians still argue whether long voyages transformed sailors permanently or whether they slipped back into shore life seamlessly upon return. You suspect transformation lingers. The mind adapts like the body does. You begin to find comfort in routine. The rhythm of waves becomes familiar rather than oppressive. Silence feels less heavy. The ocean, once alien, starts to feel like a vast companion, indifferent but constant. Tonight, you lean against the rail again, gazing at a sky pierced with stars. Somewhere beyond that darkness lies home. You can't see it. You can't measure it with sextant or chronometer. But you carry it quietly, tucked between memory and hope. The bell rings softly behind you. You inhale salt air, exhale longing, and turn back toward the glow of lanterns and the murmur of your floating world. Out here, faith, whether in God, luck, or simply tomorrow, becomes another tool of survival. And you hold it close. After enough weeks of wind and routine, you begin to understand something subtle: boredom can be as dangerous as hunger. When the sea is calm and the sails are steady, there are long stretches where nothing urgent demands your attention. No storm to wrestle. No land to sight. Just blue water sliding past the hull in an endless, hypnotic ribbon. The human mind, left unstimulated too long, starts inventing its own storms. In the 1800s, sailors filled these quiet hours with whatever entertainment they could create. That's your grounded historical fact here. Sea shanties were not just songs for morale, they were work songs, designed to coordinate labor like hauling lines or raising anchors. Rhythm made effort more efficient. A call-and-response chorus could turn synchronized strain into something almost joyful. You hear it first during a heavy pull on a stubborn rope. A low voice begins, rough but steady. Others join. The cadence locks in. Way, hey, the line tightens in time with the beat. Work transforms into shared momentum. You feel your muscles respond differently, less isolated, more collective. Historians still argue about how standardized shanties truly were. Some believe certain songs spread widely across fleets. Others suggest they evolved constantly, lyrics shifting from ship to ship. What remains clear is their purpose, unity through rhythm. Beyond music, sailors carve. Scrimshaw, intricate carvings etched into bone or ivory, especially by whalers, emerges from long idle hours. You might not have whale ivory at hand, but you see men etching designs into bits of wood, shaping small tokens, chess pieces, keepsakes. Hands that haul ropes all day can become surprisingly delicate at night. Here's a quirky tidbit drifting across the deck like a lazy breeze. Some sailors keep small pets aboard, cats to control rats, of course, but occasionally even pigs or goats for fresh meat later. A ship's cat becomes unofficial royalty. Sailors swear certain cats can predict storms by acting restless hours before clouds gather. Gambling is another constant companion. Dice clatter softly against wooden crates. Cards shuffle in lantern light. Wagers aren't extravagant, bits of tobacco, portions of rum, promises of future chores, but the stakes feel real enough to spark laughter or mild arguments. Storytelling might be the most powerful entertainment of all. At night, when watches overlap and conversation flows, tales emerge. Exaggerated storms. Narrow escapes from pirates. Ports filled with impossible sights. You suspect some stories grow taller with each retelling. That's part of the charm. Historians still debate how much maritime folklore shaped public perception of sailors versus reflecting reality. But here, in this wooden world, stories are currency. You add your own sometimes. Maybe a childhood anecdote. Maybe a humorous retelling of your early seasickness, now safe to laugh about. Laughter rolls across the deck, brief and bright against the steady hush of waves. You also read, if you're fortunate enough to have access to books. Some ships carry small libraries, especially naval vessels. Navigation manuals. Religious texts. The occasional novel. Pages become precious escapes. Words carry you somewhere that isn't bounded by horizon. There are games of strength too. Friendly contests of arm wrestling. Timed climbs into rigging. Nothing official, just small ways to burn energy and assert identity. And then there's simple observation. You lean over the rail watching flying fish burst from waves like silver arrows. You track dolphins racing alongside the bow, darting in arcs that seem almost playful. Sometimes phosphorescence glows beneath the surface at night, tiny organisms lighting up with each disturbance, turning the ship's wake into a shimmering trail. It feels like sailing through stardust. Historians still argue how sailors interpreted such natural phenomena. Were they purely practical observers, or did wonder seep in despite hardened routines? You suspect wonder always finds a way. Entertainment isn't just distraction. It's preservation of sanity. Without small joys, monotony would hollow you out. You begin to see how crews that laugh together endure longer. Even arguments serve a purpose. A heated debate over cards releases tension that might otherwise fester. A sarcastic comment about the cook's latest attempt at stew becomes communal therapy. You realize something quietly powerful: creativity thrives in confinement. Deprived of external stimulation, the mind generates its own. Tonight, you sit on an overturned barrel while someone plucks a simple tune on a battered fiddle. The melody drifts across dark water, dissolving into wind. You don't know the official name of the song. Maybe it doesn't have one. But for a moment, the ship feels less like isolation and more like a small floating village. The bell rings in the distance, marking another half hour. Time moves, steady as ever. You glance at the horizon, unchanged, patient, and feel less threatened by it now. Boredom no longer feels like an enemy. It feels like space. Space where songs are born. Where carvings take shape. Where stories stretch longer than the sea itself. Survival, you're learning, isn't only about resisting danger. It's about remembering how to live between dangers. And as laughter fades into the night breeze, you realize the ocean has not stolen your humanity. It has simply forced you to rediscover it in smaller, sturdier forms. Weeks turn into something less measurable. You stop counting days precisely. Instead, you count rhythms: the bell's chime, the changing of watches, the rotation of meals, the waxing and waning of the moon. Time at sea in the 1800s was rarely tracked by calendar in the way we obsess over it now. It was tracked by routine. And routine reshapes you. Your hands are no longer soft. The skin has thickened into calluses, especially along the palms and fingers where rope constantly rubs. Salt has worked into every small cut. At first, each scrape burned like fire. Now, pain feels distant, dulled by repetition. You wake before the bell some mornings. Your body has memorized the pattern. This is how adaptation happens, slowly, almost invisibly. Historians still debate how quickly new sailors became true seamen. Was it weeks? Months? Or was it more psychological than physical? You suspect the transformation begins the moment fear turns into familiarity. You move differently now. Your stance automatically widens when walking the deck. Your knees bend subtly to absorb the ship's roll. Even on calmer days, your body anticipates motion. The ocean has taught you balance. There's something else it teaches too, humility. One afternoon, dark clouds gather without much warning. The wind shifts, subtle at first, then insistent. Orders snap across the deck. Reef the sails. Hands move fast. Yours included. Rain lashes down in sheets. The deck becomes slick. Thunder cracks close enough to feel in your chest. The mast groans under strain. For a moment, fear returns, sharp and immediate. But this time, you don't freeze. You pull lines with practiced rhythm. You shout confirmations back to the bosun. Your movements are not frantic, they are focused. You are part of the machine now, one cog among many, but necessary. Storms in the 1800s were among the greatest threats to wooden sailing ships. Without modern forecasting, crews relied on barometric changes, cloud patterns, and instinct. Some captains were praised for reading skies like books. Others were remembered for misjudgments that cost lives. Historians still debate how much was skill and how much was luck. The storm passes faster than you feared. When it does, silence settles heavily. The sea still churns, but the sky begins to clear. You look around the deck, soaked, exhausted faces staring back at you. And then someone laughs. Not because it was funny, but because you're still here. That laughter feels different from the card games at night. It's earned. You realize something quietly profound: fear shared is fear halved. Later, as you hang damp clothes to dry and inspect minor damage, you catch your reflection in a polished bit of brass. Sunburned. Leaner. Eyes sharper. You look older. Not by years. By experience. The ocean strips away certain illusions. It doesn't care about pride, or social rank beyond ship hierarchy, or the stories you told on land about who you were. Out here, usefulness matters more than reputation. Can you tie a knot correctly in darkness? Can you climb rigging without hesitation? Can you keep your footing when everything tilts? That is your identity now. Even the smallest comforts feel magnified. A warm mug of tea after cold rain. A dry hammock. A calm sunset painted in streaks of orange and violet. You watch the sun sink slowly into the horizon, that perfect illusion of fire melting into water. Sailors once believed strange things about such sights. Some saw omens in red skies. Others trusted the old saying, "Red sky at night, sailor's delight." Meteorologists today would explain it with atmospheric scattering. But on this deck, it still feels like quiet magic. At night, you lie in your hammock and notice something subtle. The creaks no longer keep you awake. The sway feels natural. Your mind doesn't race as much. The constant mental noise you carried from land, worries about status, future plans, minor grievances, seems far away. There's only what needs to be done tomorrow. And tomorrow will come whether you're ready or not. That simplicity is strangely freeing. Historians still argue whether life at sea hardened men or clarified them. Was it brutality or discipline that shaped character? Perhaps both. The conditions were undeniably harsh: limited food, strict hierarchy, real danger. Yet many sailors signed on again after voyages ended. Why return? Maybe because life at sea reduced existence to essentials: work, survival, companionship, horizon. No endless distraction. No crowded streets. Just effort and consequence. You feel it now. You're no longer just surviving the voyage. You're part of it. The ship moves forward because every rope is handled. Every sail adjusted. Every watch stood. Including yours. The wind fills canvas again. The hull cuts steadily through open water. Somewhere beyond that unbroken horizon lies your destination, a port you may have only heard described in embellished stories. You don't know exactly when you'll see land again. But for the first time, that uncertainty doesn't terrify you. It steadies you. Because you understand something now that you didn't on your first day aboard. The sea does not promise comfort. It promises transformation. And as you drift toward sleep, rocked by timber and tide, you realize the ocean hasn't just tested you. It has rebuilt you. Land appears first as a rumor. A faint smudge along the horizon. So subtle you question your own eyes. The lookout calls down, voice edged with restrained excitement. Land ho! Every head turns. In the 1800s, landfall after weeks, or months, at sea was more than visual relief. It was survival confirmed. Fresh water. Fresh food. Repairs. Letters. Wages. For some, it meant freedom from the rolling deck. For others, it meant temptation waiting just beyond the docks. As the dark line grows into something solid, details emerge. Cliffs. A faint outline of buildings. Maybe the slender rise of church steeples or warehouse cranes. The smell reaches you before clarity does, a mix of soil, vegetation, smoke, and human life. After endless salt air, it feels overwhelming. Your body reacts in strange ways. Excitement, yes. But also tension. You've grown used to the ship's rhythm. Land doesn't move. It doesn't creak at night. It doesn't demand balance. Some sailors in the 19th century even reported feeling disoriented on solid ground after long voyages, a sensation we now call mal de débarquement. Historians and medical experts still debate how common or severe it truly was, but the accounts exist. As the anchor drops with a heavy splash, a deep silence follows. No forward motion. Just stillness. Boats are lowered. Cargo is prepared. The harbor bustles with unfamiliar accents and dockworkers shouting instructions. Flags snap overhead, marking different nations. In a port city like London, Boston, or Calcutta, the docks in the 1800s were chaotic arteries of global trade: tea, rum, cotton, spices, timber, goods that stitched continents together through effort and risk. You step into the smaller boat that will carry you ashore. The water between ship and dock feels symbolic. A narrow gap separating two versions of yourself. When your boots finally meet with that doesn't sway, your knees bend instinctively to compensate for motion that isn't there. For a second, you feel unsteady, not because the ground moves, but because it doesn't. The noise is overwhelming. Vendors shouting. Horses clattering over cobblestone. Church bells ringing somewhere inland. Children weaving between carts. The air smells of coal smoke, fish, tar, and baking bread. Bread. The scent alone nearly stops you. Fresh produce piles high in stalls, apples, onions, greens. After salted meat and hardtack, the colors feel almost unreal. Sailors in the 1800s often suffered from vitamin deficiencies during long voyages. Scurvy, caused by lack of vitamin C, was a real and deadly threat before citrus solutions became widespread in naval practice. Stepping into a market filled with fresh food wasn't just pleasant. It was medicinal. You realize how small your world had become at sea. The ship was everything. A floating boundary of wood and rope. Now the world feels wide again. Crewmates scatter in small groups. Some head for taverns immediately, places where ale flows and stories multiply. Ports were infamous for both celebration and trouble. Fights, gambling losses, impulsive spending. Historians still debate how exaggerated sailors' reputations were, but there's no denying that months of restraint often erupted into excess. You walk more slowly. Each step feels heavy, grounded. You pass storefront windows and catch your reflection again. You don't look like the person who boarded weeks ago. There's a quiet steadiness in your posture now. Your eyes scan automatically, measuring distances, noting exits, observing sky conditions without thinking. The sea hasn't left you. It lingers in your stance, in the salt embedded deep into your boots, in the instinct to glance at wind direction. And then, unexpectedly, you miss it. Not the storms. Not the hunger. But the horizon. On land, your view is blocked by buildings and hills. The sky feels smaller. Crowded. At sea, the world was terrifying, but open. Here, it's busy, but enclosed. You find a quiet spot along the dock and look back at the ship. From this angle, it seems smaller than it did when you stood upon it. Less imposing. Just wood and canvas against water. But you know better. That vessel carried you across distances that once seemed impossible. It demanded effort. Patience. Endurance. And it gave you something intangible in return. Perspective. In the 1800s, global trade reshaped economies and empires. Ships like yours weren't just transportation, they were lifelines of commerce, colonization, migration, and conflict. Historians still debate whether this maritime expansion brought more progress or exploitation. The truth likely depends on who is telling the story. But on a personal level, stripped of geopolitics, your voyage was simpler. You left as one version of yourself. You return as another. As evening settles over the harbor, lanterns flicker to life along the docks. The ship's silhouette rests quietly against dark water. Tomorrow, cargo will unload. Wages will be distributed. Some sailors will sign on for another voyage. Others will walk away. You stand between those choices now. The ocean no longer feels like an enemy. It feels like a teacher. And whether you return to it or remain on land, you carry its lessons forward. Balance is learned through instability. Courage is built through repetition. Community is forged through shared danger. And survival is not just enduring hardship, but adapting to it. The sea changed you. Not with grand speeches. Not with dramatic revelation. But with wind, salt, hunger, labor, laughter, and horizon. And as the tide shifts quietly beneath the dock, you realize something final. You are no longer just someone who crossed the ocean. You are someone the ocean crossed. End of experience narrative? If you'd like, I can now